tonight I wanted to be talking to you about the massive ambushes being conducted by the Palestinian resistance, primarily Al-Qassam brigades, but also Saraya al-Quds, both armed wing of Hamas and the PIJ, against the genocide forces wreaking havoc and destruction and barbarism in Gaza. The following thing that I wanted to be talking to you about is the important developments that are happening on the Syrian front. Every single day, by the hour, we have more and more updates. And now it appears to be that we are having a strike from the Syrian government and its backers against the advancement of the armed Syrian opposition, and what all of that means alongside the developments that are happening on the diplomatic side, trying to resolve matters when it comes to Syria. But we're going to start off with this here, Al-Qassam brigades and Saraya al-Quds, but this video was released by Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, taking action against the genocide forces in Rafah. Now, mind you, Rafah is an area that the genocide forces have been in for over 8 months now. Benjamin Netanyahu said he dismantled the brigades in Rafah, that he destroyed all of the tunnels, that they basically got rid of them. However, it appears to be that these resistance forces in Rafah are still exceptionally active. So in this operation that was conducted several days back and Al-Qassam released today, they usually have a bit of a delay sometimes when it comes to publishing the videos due to security purposes and things that are on the ground. And they called it the operation as in paying back for the blood of the martyr Yahya Sinwar. So this attack, it had 3 ambushes. This is the first ambush, right? This is the first ambush coming from the Palestinian resistance. They had 3 ambushes, one against tanks, one against the D9 bulldozers that destroys buildings, and the other one, a sniper shooting genocide soldiers inside of Rafah. In the eastern part of Rafah, it's called the Junaina neighborhood. And these are the Egyptian borders here. So the Palestinian resistance published this attack, and this is the location. This is one of their snipers here conducting these attacks against some of the genocide soldiers in Gaza. And I'll let you watch some of it with the audio here.
وعند الوصول قوات نجدة للعدو يقوم وليد بقطع النجدات عن منطقة المقتلة الآلي التوثيق والسداد.
بتقدموا باتجاه الشمال الغربي من منطقة المسلخ، والحين بشوف قديش العدد وببلغك. تمام، هاي الآليات وصل محيط البرج. تمام، هاي نقرب نوصل لك هنا نوصل لنا.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر كمل الله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الحمد لله الحمد لله. اللهم في سبيلك ابتغاء مرضاتك يا رب يا رب. وكان الله الله أكبر الحق. وكان الله توكل على الله توكل على الله توكل على الله الله اكبر ولله الحمد ثلاثة أربعة مصورين خمسة ستة الله أكبر ولله الحمد
So this was a summary of these operations that the Palestinian resistance carried out several days back against the genocide forces in Gaza several days ago, and that they just published today, and that is in Rafah. That is in the eastern part of Rafah, an area that, again, Israel said that it controlled completely several months back, and they said that they also dismantled the final brigades of the Hamas forces, or their armed wing, in that part in Gaza several months back. And again, we are having these footages coming from these areas specifically, not only when it comes to Al-Qassam brigades, but for other resistance movements in Gaza as well. That indicates that, like in the north, and the north is more hardly hit than the south, we were still seeing images coming from the south targeting Israel at levels that are not less complicated and intense than those being conducted in the north. And what does that all mean when we're talking about this hopeful situation when it comes to a ceasefire? That means a couple of things. That, firstly, the approach towards a ceasefire wouldn't have taken place altogether if it wasn't for the genocide forces in Gaza still getting hit and targeted by the Palestinian resistance. If they had no resistance in Gaza, they wouldn't call or require a ceasefire. They would simply continue to forcibly expel the population and complete, or try to complete, the ethnic cleansing campaign through continued massacres and starvation and barbarism in sadistic ways that we haven't witnessed previously in history, and got the deal done. Simple. They have plans to settle in Gaza. They're trying their luck when it comes to these plans. And if they had no armed resistance in Gaza, well, they would have implemented those plans from a very long time ago. So the first reason is, well, we're still facing resistance on the ground, and that's why they are going towards the negotiations. The second thing is, well, the Palestinian side, they are not stopping these armed resistance against this genocide army in Gaza for the sake of these negotiations. So although yesterday we're speaking about new mediators coming in the picture, Russia becoming more involved and potentially being a mediator after we have a ceasefire, more talks, the delegation in Egypt, in Israel, and likewise Israeli delegations in Egypt, more statements coming from the representatives of Hamas who are representing the Palestinian side when it comes to the negotiations, and their talks about more communication to do with the ceasefire and the prospect of having a ceasefire. And again, nothing confirmed. And even if we do have a ceasefire can be broken, like the very fragile ceasefire that we have with Lebanon and Israel at the moment. So the Palestinian resistance is still there, it's still ongoing, it's still strong, and there is no sign of them backing down or stopping anytime soon. That's the first thing. The second thing, Ansarullah in Yemen, they targeted the genocide state with Palestine 2 missiles. Palestine 2 missiles are hypersonic missiles that can reach well to beyond Israel, really. And that's not the first time that they're targeted. They said we target the strategic location inside of the occupied territories with a Palestine 2 hypersonic missile, and that they also targeted a US destroyer and 3 supporting ships that belong to the US Navy in the Arab Sea and the Gulf of Aden with 16 ballistic missiles and UAVs and cruise missiles as well. This statement came earlier on from the spokesperson of Ansarullah, Yahya Sari'. He had this statement earlier on in which he declared all of this operation and the fact that they are still continuing their operations against Israel up until we have a ceasefire with Gaza and the siege is lifted on Gaza. A couple of days ago, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansarullah, he said that he congratulated Lebanon on their victory on Israel, the Lebanese resistance, but he said that there is no ceasefire with Yemen and Israel. Likewise with the Iraqi resistance movements, they said there is no ceasefire between us and Israel, and this is another sign that the war hasn't stopped, and the only ceasefire when it comes to the confrontation comes only from Lebanon, although we still have ongoing tensions and recorded breaches that Israel is conducting not only on the borders but also inside of Lebanese territories deep into Lebanon. Some of these breaches were recorded in Beirut. So that's the second thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Important developments coming from Ansarullah targeting the genocide coalition that is supporting Israel in the Red Sea, and also targeting the genocide state itself with a Palestine 2 or Palestine 2 ballistic missile. Which leads us to the third thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We've been talking about and covering the developments in Syria for the past couple of days, and they are indeed developing very, very quickly. We had a confirmation coming from the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're called, from the administration of the liberated areas, as they call it, that their leader, Al-Julani, was killed in a strike on their headquarters that took place in Idlib by the Russian Air Force. They call it the Russian-Syrian Air Force, because the Russian and Syrian Air Forces, they conduct joint operations inside of Syria, and yesterday they decided to target the leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're called the Committee to Liberate the Levant in English, that are conducting this operation in northeast Syria that is now stretching down to Hama. Now, with regards to Hama, there are conflicting reports. Hama is quite a distance from Aleppo, Hama, and you're getting closer to the central parts of Syria, closer to the borders with Lebanon. There were reports that the armed opposition reached those areas. Other reports confirming that no, we are also facing confrontation by the Syrian army against those movements in those areas. Today, the Iranian foreign minister was in Syria. The foreign minister was in Syria after a planned visit that we spoke about yesterday, during which he spoke with the prime minister, with the president, excuse me, of Syria, Bashar al-Assad. So we had this report here in Al-Mayadeen saying the Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi has arrived in Damascus and he affirms solidarity with Syria, unwavering support for Syria amid the activation of foreign-backed Takfiri terrorist groups in the country. This is the terminology being used by them. Araghchi and his delegation arrived in the Syrian capital on Sunday to deliver a message of steadfast support for the Syrian army and government from Tehran based on what he told reporters before departing. He emphasized that Iran sees no difference between the Israeli regime and Takfiri terrorists, stating that we believe that following the Israeli regime's failures, the enemy is trying to implement its sinister goals of spreading insecurity in the region via the same terrorist groups. Araghchi expressed confidence that, based on precedents, the Syrian army would prevail against these groups. This comes as terrorist units advance southward towards the city of Hama, showcasing that a coordinated counterattack by the Syrian army appears to be taking shape. Now, a note here, based on precedents, that is indeed correct. In previous times, there were advancements when it comes to the Syrian opposition and the armed groups towards many parts of Syria, but they later retreated. They were targeted, they were confronted, and they had to retreat eventually when they faced proper opposition. And usually when it comes to the situation in Syria, we've seen many cases of tactical retreat from the government forces and their backers and their supporters, following which they had taken these areas back. And when it comes to the actual armed opposition conducting this operation in Syria, there is no physical vision or physical evidence to support the fact that they would be able to establish themselves properly in those locations that they were in. And in some of these locations, like Aleppo, for example, there were Syrian forces that retreated, but not like massive numbers of Syrian forces, because the situation was pretty safe. And we were in the middle of a peace process, talking about more de-escalation. And also, we were expecting more de-escalation following the statements coming from Turkey and from Syria as well, that they will be sitting down, they will be potentially sitting down and talking to each other to try and resolve matters. So clearly there's a strike back coming from the Syrian side. And also, there is a meeting that is due to take place between the Iranian foreign minister Abbas Araghchi and Turkey. He might meet with Erdogan himself, or he might meet with the foreign minister too. Both of them are very much heavily involved in what's happening in Syria. Now, his tone with Turkey, because they always have ties, but there's always tensions between Iran and Turkey. His tone could be one of the two. He would either be threatening Turkey from continuing this operation and warning them that they might receive more severe blows than they could have imagined, because previously, even in talks that happened in Astana and Sochi, Turkey always insisted on having these autonomous regions in the northwestern part, of Syria, and sometimes they tried to exclude them. However, the general agreement spoke about general de-escalation when it comes to these areas. So Iran and the backing the Syrian government, and of course Russia too, anyone supporting the Syrian government, they might be conducting attacks deeper into these territories. And the assassination strike that happened against the leader of one of the armed opposition movements in those areas came in Idlib. That's an area that they have been controlling for a while. That's been under their control, closer to the Turkish borders. And that also was trying to send a message to Turkey and these movements that, well, we've retreated tactically here, but that doesn't mean you're not going to be met with a fierce response. And before you think of advancing further, think again when it comes to the areas that you are in. And again, Turkey might cooperate in a positive manner with Iran. So far, they're trying to deny that they have any involvement, which is, I'm not sure how to describe that, the Turkish denial when it comes to their involvement with these armed movements. I mean, talking about people who have been trained, armed in Turkey. They've been allowed by Turkey to do that. As a matter of fact, there is no genuine reason on the ground or benefit for Turkey, who's backing these movements now, from this operation. And I'll tell you why. Because Turkey, the publicly known information coming from Turkey, the general theme is that their presence there is primarily against the Kurdish movements. This attack that's happening by the Turkish-backed, and when we talk about Turkey is in the NATO is the US and Israel, all of that, they're all together, This operation hasn't gone anywhere near the Kurdish areas or the Kurdish-controlled areas. The Kurdish movements, the Democratic Syria Forces, or parties aligned with the PKK, they're in the northeast. If Turkey's operation was primarily worried about that, well, then why didn't you go towards the east? Why are you going down Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and to Damascus and declaring that you all of a sudden want to liberate Syria? Where did that exactly come from now? Why the M5? Why the strategic lifeline from Syria to Lebanon? And why now? You see, all of these moves are extremely suspicious, and it's not convincing coming from Turkey to say that they are not involved or that they have nothing to do with it, because these people, firstly, are backed by them and trained by them. And the operation that they're conducting and the fact that it's not in line with the declared worries of Turkey in Syria, which is the Kurds, well, leads us to establish the fact that this campaign is primarily by Israel and the United States. No one else. It's for the sake of them. If the movements that they are backing, and Turkey has enough leverage on all of these movements to prevent them from doing anything, to force retreat, or to ask them to conduct an operation, they have the leverage on them because of the level of support on them. If they are enabling this operation that is happening on the strategic lifeline between Syria and Hezbollah and Lebanon, that means that this operation is 100% made in Israel and the United States. Absolutely 100%. Because they are supported by Turkey, and the operation isn't targeting the side that Turkey claims to be present or supporting parties in that area to deter, who are the Kurdish movements. They haven't touched them. As a matter of fact, they tactically started to coordinate with the Syrian government against this advancement of these forces. That means some of the Kurdish movements came west from the northeastern part of Syria. All of these things prove that this operation is genuinely for the sake of Israel and the United States. There is no other explanation. And it came 15 hours after Netanyahu warned Syria. And it came exactly after the ceasefire. And after Israel was forced to have this ceasefire following repeated blows from Hezbollah, who are receiving the majority of their missiles through Syria. Is there any other explanation? If someone else has another explanation, tell me. So, when we have more reports, and we're due to get more reports coming from the meeting of Arakshi and the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, we're going to cover these. And we're also anticipating his meetings with the Turkish side. Let's hope that they try and reach a peaceful resolution here and focus on resolving internal matters in a diplomatic way, because like I said, we had a peace process, we had a long ceasefire in those areas for a while. This operation came out of the blues, really, but not out of the blues from the sides who were behind this operation. That was indeed enabled by Turkey too, and there is a prospect of them reaching a solution with Turkey, but there is also another opportunity, and that opportunity is having a really big campaign that could take some time when it comes to Syria. There was a report, by the way, coming from Germany, that Iran now has the Su-35. Iran receives 2 Su-35 SE from Russia. They only said that they received 2. Now, mind you, there were also previous reports that Iran got the Su-35 from, according to the German media outlet Flug Review, the handover took place in a private ceremony in the Komsomolsk on Amur aircraft manufacturing facility in Russia, in Russia's Far East. And they said that they received their first 2 SU-35 SE fighter jets on November the 18th, something that is signaling that we will be having more. According to the German media outlet Flug Review, the handover took place in a private ceremony. The 2 fighter jets were disassembled into several parts and transported to Tehran's Mahrabad airport using a Russian military Antonov AN-124-100 transport aircraft. Upon arrival in Tehran, the components were transferred to an airbase in Hamadan for reassembly, marking Iran's acquisition of its first 4.5 generation fighter jets. These jets are expected to modernize Iran's air force, which has relied on aging aircraft since the era of the Shah. Now, this is very, very important. I mean, especially with the fact that Iran, when it comes to air force, that's not considered their strategic weapon. And I don't think even with the arrival of the Su-35s or 35 SEs that the Air Force will become their strategic weapons. The strategic weapons of Iran in the short and medium terms will remain the missiles. They've decided that that's their strategic weapon. But this is a very, very important development, especially with the fact that their fighter jets are extremely old. I mean, you're talking about F-14 Tomcat, F-4. That's extremely old, and that would be a massive push for Iran, and that also signals the level of coordination coming from Russia with Iran. And we're also expected to hear about a very important development when it comes to an agreement. Some said it will be a defense pact between Iran and Russia.